I remember being 5 years old, seeing this movie back when it first came out in 2002, the first Spider-Man. And I remember just being like really just blown away by it and just obsessed with it as a young child. I remember watching it almost every day, uh, or before school or after school. I'd rewatch parts of it, like just scenes that I would like or things like that. I was really obsessed with this movie when I first saw it, and the magic of it really, really captured my heart as a kid. And whenever I rewatch these movies, specifically the first two, I'll talk about the third one a little bit, but when I watch the first two, they always hold up so well, and they always make you feel something every time you rewatch it. And of course, I know I'm not alone. These movies are beloved movies, very, very beloved superhero films, up there with, in the same conversation as The Dark Knight and stuff like that. Usually brought up in the same conversation, especially Spider-Man 2. But I think that the first one is really just as good as the second in a lot of ways, and the two really complete each other. And the third has its role as well. But I wanted to make this because on this recent rewatch, it's changed. My age has changed my view of the film, of the first two. Because what's become like extremely clear to me is that these movies have such a strong sense of right and wrong. And to me, that is the thing that I come away from it with as an adult that I appreciate the most. The sense of right and wrong. Because it's not always easy, Maybe it's easy to be a decent person, but sometimes it's really hard to be a good person, to really go the extra mile and to really try. And that is on full display, especially in Spider-Man 2, in this movie, or in these movies. You see this character get punished for doing the right thing. And Spider-Man 2 just hits that so hard. It just hammers that point home so well. Everything with him losing his powers and his motivation, it's all linked back into this sort of thing, this sort of promise, I really love the scene where after Ben dies, and after the graduation happens, and Peter's at home in his room and he's crying, and May comes in and he just says, "I missed him a lot today." And May holds this sort of religious, spiritual belief that he was there. And she holds on to this, and she is like a very religious character, very spiritual character through all three of them. And she never really stops with that. That's kind of a reoccurring theme with her. And she says to Peter that he was there at the graduation. And Peter's, the look on his face is a little bit dismissive. It's a little bit like, you don't know that, And then he continues on to say what he followed that with, which I forgot. I just saw the movies just now, but I kind of forgot what he said in that moment. But oh yeah, it was about him spitting in his face, metaphorically. When he said, with great power comes great responsibility, and he chucked it right back in his face and rejected it. And May says to him, you'll make him proud, like he's proud of you, and you will continue to make him proud. I'm paraphrasing that, but it's this thought that he's still there, that carries Peter with his motivation. It's not just paying respects, it's this consistency. And there's this internal monologue that happens where he says to him right after, he says, with great power comes great responsibility. Remember that, Pete. Remember that. Which he didn't say that in the original. He didn't say that when he first said that to him. He didn't say, remember that. And then when it carries into Spider-Man 2 and he quits, and he has that conversation with him in that weird sort of dream sequence where he's trying to talk him out of quitting being Spider-Man. It's because Ben is still with him. Ben is still, like, carrying on with him. And it's hard to explain it. It's really hard to explain it. But there's something, honestly, like, the sense of morality is so strong in this film, in these two, that it is spiritual, I think, in nature. It feels like it's very, very uplifting. The scene where May starts talking about heroes at the garage sale when they're selling stuff, and Henry's helping pack up the stuff and move because their house is about to be foreclosed. And May starts talking about heroes and what they mean. And, you know, how Peter inspired people. And just the look on his face. I love the camera work in the movie. I love how they zoom in, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes there's funny scenes. It's one of the most meme-worthy movies, as far as, like, you can just take a face and just make it a meme so easily. But there's something so personal about these movies. And it really shows you that, like, a life of sacrifice, a life of being a good person, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And when Peter decides to start looking after number one, when he starts to, look after himself, and he decides it's just too hard, it's too late. And he starts making these really stupid decisions with Mary Jane. And he wants to destroy her marriage, basically. Like, he wants to reunite with her. And it's too late. And there's a moment where she says, you have changed. Or you are different. And she sees it because that light in him, that spirit, has dwindled. And that's why he's losing his powers. It's weird. Some people have complained about Spider-Man 2, I've seen, because he loses his powers, because it's never really explained through any actual, like, plot device or plot explanation. But I think those people are missing the point. It doesn't really need a reason. The whole reason is self-explanatory. It's about motivation. It's about will. It's about the will of the spirit. And how you can just be crushed under that weight of life being hard, really. And Peter just takes such a beating in Spider-Man 2. It just keeps happening again and again. And there's only so much he can take. There's so many examples. I'm doing this video sort of impromptu. I wish I had written a list, because I didn't really think about making a video on this, really, until now. But there's so many little moments. I recommend rewatching this movie. I recommend rewatching, if you're going to rewatch them, rewatch all of them. Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3, just rewatch all of them, I would say. But if you've only got to rewatch one, just rewatch Spider-Man 2, because 2 is really where it hits this point home so hard. And, like, I recommend watching this movie and imagining yourself as a father, or, if you're a woman, a mother, showing this movie to your child and thinking about the values that it's instilling in your child. and think about the message of the film and what it's telling you. And I think you'll come away from that movie respecting it so much more and loving it sincerely. Because not every superhero film really has anything to say. Some superhero films really have nothing to say at all, and it's flashy. It's an amusement park ride, like what Scorsese said when he criticized superhero films, specifically of the Marvel variant now, But there's something that this movie had, and it really is soul. And I believe that literally. I think that there's something really beautiful and holy about this movie. So, yeah. Again, I'm trying to think of the examples throughout. I mean, I love the scene when he tries to save the girl in the fire, and he does. There's little moments where he's hanging off of the ledge, because he jumps across the broken, walkway, and there's fire beneath him, and he's hanging on. And the little girl makes that effort to pull him up. The human spirit is just so triumphant in the movie, I know that it was made in a post 9/11 world, right after 9/11, just a year later with the first movie. And some people cringe and joke, and it's funny, with the whole thing, you mess with Spidey, you mess with New York thing. But, man, it doesn't fail to inspire me still. It still does, I still feel it. And maybe I'm cheesy, maybe I'm naive for that, but I don't think so. I think that there's something so important about those movies. And I think it's something that honestly hasn't been tapped into since probably the Chris Reeve era. I think when it comes to just showing the sort of American spirit, the human spirit, and that soul, that unexplainable thing. I really think that Spider-Man 1 and 2 capture that better than any other superhero movie, except for maybe the first two Christopher Reeve Superman movies. Nothing else really compares to it. I mean, not X-Men, not the Tim Burton Batman movies, even though I adore them. I love those movies. Even The Dark Knight. I think that the Dark Knight movies have, incredible dialogue. They're incredible films. Very good plots, too. But they're very cold. They're very deep. They're trying very hard to be deep, philosophical, sort of. A lot of dialogue with emphasis on it. I think of you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Lines like that. But where's the human spirit in it, it's there. Bruce Wayne is an inspiring figure because he gets his back broken, his spirit broken by Bane, but he carries on, and he rises up. But at the same time, man, is he not, so cold against Alfred, or cold to Alfred in the third film? I don't know. The relationship with Alfred in the Dark Knight films is a little bit troubling to me sometimes, between Bruce and Alfred. Sometimes I do prefer the interpretation of Bruce Wayne with Michael Keaton. But I still do love Christian Bale. Christian Bale was great. And when we look at the, Marvel movies, I don't know. If I'm looking at Marvel movies that had, when I say Marvel movies, by the way, I'm referring to MCU movies. When I think of Marvel movies that had that sort of spirit, I think that the first Captain America movie had that a little bit. But I think that's a product of that's the result of it being a period piece. It's trying to capture a slice of Americana, basically, of the 1940s World War II American spirit. That's what it's really capturing. So I think that movie might be an exception. But you know what inspired me to rewatch these Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies was I recently rewatched the Thor movie, or sorry, didn't rewatch. I watched the new one. Is what I meant to say. I hadn't seen it before. Thor: Love and Thunder, and I watched it with a friend online, and because it's already released on demand. And the humor is so uh it's just they berate you with it to such an extent that my friend Brandon said while we were watching the movie, he said these movies are made from a very cynical place, or they come from a very cynical place, and he's 100% right about that. The humor, sometimes humor when it's so uh it's so cheeky to a point where it's like it's so just dry humor. It's like little quips here and there. I don't know how to explain it, but those films are cold. They're cold. The MCU movies are cold. This movie's warm in comparison. There's warmth. It feels like you're returning home. And it's not just nostalgia. I guarantee it. Show any child these movies, and that's what I wonder. I wonder for the modern generation, for the modern people that are the Generation Z kids that are growing up, and a father shows or a mother shows them the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies versus the Andrew Garfield ones or the Tom Holland ones. It's been a while since I've seen the Andrew Garfield ones. I don't really hate those movies, to be honest. I know some people do. I kind of didn't like the second one, Amazing Spider-Man 2, but I liked the first one more, I remember. It's been a while. I'll probably rewatch those soon as well. But I wonder if children, if the young kids can't see the light in this movie. Because it's there. It's so there. So yeah, I just wanted to make that. I just wanted to make this video talking about that stuff. I could go on and on about examples. I mean, the example when Peter is carried by the people on the train. And the kid promises, I won't tell nobody. It's just because his mask. He was unmasked. For anyone that hasn't seen it, Peter was unmasked. Spider-Man was unmasked, and a kid saw him. A bunch of people saw him, and the kid said, "I'm not going to tell anybody your secret." It reminds me of. I remember seeing this thing. This one concept. It's a Catholic concept which I didn't know really existed. It's something called a victim soul, and it's kind of a wild idea, and I don't really know how much I really buy into it. But it's a concept that someone just lives a very hard life. They were just destined to live that very hard life, but it serves a greater purpose. You know? I'd recommend looking up the Wikipedia on that. I wish I had it pulled up, but that concept of someone who's just, they've been through the ringer, they've been through it all, but there's something good that comes out of it, you know? And life is hard, like, one thing about Spider-Man 2 that I find interesting is that Peter does actually end up with Mary Jane at the end. But I think that the movie would have been perfect still if he hadn't ended up with Mary Jane at the end. And that was the lesson that the movie was teaching, that, like, this life of sacrifice, it's it's the sacrifice that you have to be willing to do to be a hero, to be a superhero, right? I mean, people talk about, it's always the cliche of like, oh, I can't be a superhero because if my enemies find out about you, then what does that mean for you? So it's sort of a selfless thing. But the flip side of that we see in Spider-Man 3, is that it's not just if my enemies find out about you, or whatever. It's also, as it turns out, dating and loving a superhero who gets his ass kicked every day is really hard. It demands a lot of you. But, that's what true love would be, is that you can bear through with that. Though love is an effort. It's a conscious effort that has to be made. It's not just something that just is. You have to put forth some sort of effort. Loving is an action, and sometimes it's not consistent. Sometimes you falter. Sometimes you stumble. But you're supposed to come back to that place, if you truly do love someone. So, yeah, and that's really strained and put to the test in Spider-Man 3, because Mary Jane really, there's definitely some difficulties with their relationship, and I think that's the biggest flaw in Spider-Man 3. If you allow me to go on a little rant about Spider-Man 3 for a second, because Spider-Man 3 does not live up to what the first two were, and part of that's because they had a different writer, and it almost feels like a different director. It's actually kind of insane. It's the same director. It's still Sam Raimi, but the spirit of it feels very, very different in a lot of ways. But it also feels very similar. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad in Spider-Man 3. That's kind of the key. I think that the things that it does bad are pretty egregious. The stuff with Peter, there are moments where Peter is really acting out of character. And I understand that the black suit made him kind of kooky. But sometimes it's so crazy that you don't even believe that. Like, even the black suit wouldn't bring that out of him. Like when he's dancing at the place. I think that's probably the worst scene in the movie. But even when he's not in the black suit, I really hate the scene when he tries to propose to Mary Jane, and he's absolutely oblivious to how offended she is, and everything with the kiss and the drama over Gwen Stacy. It's frustrating. Spider-Man 3 is a very frustrating movie to watch if you like people. If you like relationships, if you have an appreciation for well-written relationships, romance, whatever. Like, if you're a fan of like the Mass Effect games or something like that, or BioWare's style of storytelling and writing, like just good character writing, Spider-Man 3 is going to piss you off. Because like Spider-Man 3, it's not the worst plot ever. Like, people complain about like the amount of villains in the movie. I think that the amount of villains in the movie is okay. It gets in the way a little bit at the end because Venom gets a little bit rushed, but I actually think that the villains aren't really a problem so much in Spider-Man 3. It's more of the characters. It's how the characters are written. Mary Jane and Spider-Man have this drama, and the drama feels sometimes artificial. The scene where she's forced to break up with him because Harry is basically like threatening Mary Jane, that scene is completely contrived and honestly should have been done completely differently. She should have broken up with him because she actually wanted to break up with him, not because she was being threatened. Because none of it really makes sense, because she could just tell him. She knows that he's Spider-Man, so she could just tell him. Or we needed some kind of explanation. We needed something like Harry was like threatening to kill Mary Jane's entire family unless she does this or something. We needed some kind of better explanation. Very sloppy writing, unfortunately, because you could have covered your bases easier there. Through just a few little patches, basically. And there's a ton of examples like that in Spider-Man 3 where the writing just doesn't quite work. But that being said, the movie's heart is still in the right place overall, I think. The ending to the movie is great. The last scene with Harry, it's great. I love that all the villains in Spider-Man have a sort of redeeming factor to them, except for Venom, basically. Even Norman Osborn. I think Norman's a very tragic character, if you think about it, because he's very schizophrenic, There's two sides of Norman. There's, like, the Norman that doesn't want to kill Peter, but then there's the side of Norman that is, like, demanding that Norman kill Peter. There's the Goblin and the Norman dynamic, the split personality. And it's a very interesting and complex scene at the end where Peter's beating the shit out of Goblin, and then Goblin says, "Stop, stop, it's me." And he has this moment where he is emotional with Peter and says, "You're like a son to me." But he's slipping in and out of the Goblin voice. Willem Dafoe is a fantastic actor, by the way. Not that that even needs to be stated, but everyone knows that. But man, he just chewed up that scene. He nailed it. And I love the last line where he says, "Don't tell Harry." There's a little bit of regret. There's a little bit of repentance at the end when he gets stabbed by his glider. Same thing with Otto. It's all about science gone wrong. I mean, there's definitely a theme of, like, science gone wrong across all these movies, because they're all these, like, scientific horror villains. Like, they all come from, like, a scientific experiment gone horribly wrong, which is kind of just a comic book cliche. That's kind of a Stan Lee thing. But there's definitely this theme of, like, intelligence, hubris, humanity, being a gift to mankind, using your intelligence as a gift. With great power comes great responsibility, that whole thing. That applied just as much to Peter as it did to Dr. Octopus. And the conclusion of that, how that arc completes at the end, is a stroke of brilliance. It's perfect. Like, the first two movies are really, like, masterpieces, I think. I really think that they're, like, if they're not 10s out of 10, they're pretty close, I love that Peter goes through this whole character arc of coming full circle and realizing what he is, and that, he does want to be Spider-Man. Like, that whole arc of doing the right thing, that same thing basically applied to Otto. The arc basically worked through two characters, and Peter made him realize that, basically. It actually reminds me of the movie Batman Forever a little bit, with Peter finally finding the will to be Spider-Man, like the reason to be Spider-Man. Batman Forever had a similar theme about Batman sort of realizing why he is Batman. Like, I'm Batman because I choose to be, not because I have to be, that whole thing. Which, unfortunately, could have been done way better. Batman Forever is a big missed opportunity. I actually kind of like Batman Forever for what it is, but it's definitely a missed opportunity. Batman Forever, it's a better plot than Batman Returns. It's got better ideas than Batman Returns, but Batman Returns has that better aesthetic, and it has that better memorability of it. It's a lot more memorable. Batman Forever was trying to be a little bit deeper than Returns. Returns is very surface level. And unfortunately, it fell apart a little bit because Two-Face was awful in that movie. And the Riddler was okay, but, it was just kind of Jim Carrey, chewing up the scene or whatever. But yeah, like, I think Spider-Man 2 basically took that theme from Batman Forever about, like, wanting to be the character, wanting to be a superhero, and, like, going through those challenges and rising above them. That whole theme was so well done here. It was also a theme that goes back to Superman 2, actually. If you want to go back even further than Batman, you go back to Superman 2, that's what that whole movie's about. With Superman basically deciding, like, I want to be with Lois. I want to live this life with her. I want to have a family. I want to have kids, basically. And if Superman Returns is canon to you, then he does have a kid. Spoiler alert. And I like Superman Returns, by the way. which might be unpopular. I also like Man of Steel, which is also unpopular. I like all the Superman movies, basically, except for Superman 3 and Superman 4. And Justice League, I guess, if that counts. Batman vs. Superman's kind of a weird one. Anyways, that's a whole tangent. Anyways. Yeah, like, the theme was so well done in Spider-Man 2. And, when I talk about these other movies, I mean, Batman Forever is a bad movie, basically. It's a bad movie that I kind of enjoy, but, it's whatever. But, like, Superman and Superman 2, like, these superhero movies are kind of like Titans, they're big deals, and definitely you can't sleep on Spider-Man 1 and 2. Like, they're way deeper than you might think. They're cheesy, they're fun, they're funny. They don't take themselves too seriously a lot of the times, but it's the soul, it's the fact that the movie's heart is in the right place. I think that's such a big deal, and how it captures the spirit of Stan Lee as well. The best Stan Lee cameo of all time was the one in Spider-Man 3, when he says, "One person can't make a difference," Nuff said. Those values are so important. It's so important to impart that on children. And, maybe nowadays, well, I don't know, it's always true, whether it's today or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Adults need to hear it too. Adults need to be reminded of it too. That's where religion comes in, historically. People need to be reminded of where they come from, of what the right thing is. Family, that sort of thing. And, yeah, I think that this movie feels like family. And that's why I decided to use this image that I pulled off of Google for this video, for this podcast. So, yeah. I hope that this inspires someone to rewatch those movies, because they are well worth it.